There are traditions we hold dear, customs we've practiced since childhood, celebrations that feel as timeless as winter itself. Christmas is one of them. But beneath the familiar carols and the glowing lights, beneath centuries of tradition and festivity, lies a history that most of us have never been told. A history that involves ancient empires, forbidden rituals, political maneuvering, and beliefs that predate Christianity by thousands of years. Tonight I'd like to invite you on a quiet exploration, not to diminish what Christmas means to you, but to understand the remarkable journey it has taken to reach us. This is a story drawn from historical records, archaeological evidence, and the careful work of scholars across generations. It requires patience, but I believe you'll find it rewarding. Before we begin, I want to mention something. If you appreciate documentaries that take their time, that respect your intelligence, and invite genuine curiosity, I'd be honored if you'd consider subscribing. I create these explorations regularly, and I also share additional research materials and thoughtful discussions in the community tab for those who wish to continue the conversation. Now then, let us begin by asking a simple question. Where did Christmas actually come from? Chapter 1. The date that doesn't appear. To understand Christmas, we must first confront an uncomfortable truth, one that biblical scholars have known for quite some time, though it rarely reaches common conversation. The Bible does not record the date of Jesus Christ's birth, not in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, not in the letters of Paul. Nowhere in the New Testament will you find December 25th mentioned in connection with the Nativity. In fact, for the first 3 centuries of Christianity, the birth of Christ was not celebrated at all. The early church focused almost exclusively on Easter, the resurrection, which they considered the pivotal moment of their faith. This raises an important question. If December 25th was not the original date, and if early Christians didn't celebrate Christ's birth, how did we arrive at modern Christmas? The answer lies not in Bethlehem, but in Rome. Let us travel back to the 3rd century, specifically to the year 274 AD. The Roman Empire at this time was not Christian. It was a vast polytheistic civilization that worshipped many gods, and none was more important to the common people than Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun. Emperor Aurelian, facing a fractured empire and needing to unite his people under a common symbol, established December 25th as the official birthday of Sol Invictus. This was not arbitrary. December 25th fell just after the winter solstice, the shortest day of the year, when the sun began its gradual return, bringing longer days and the promise of spring. To the Romans, this was a moment of profound spiritual significance. The sun, their life-giver, had survived the darkness. Celebrations were held throughout the empire. Homes were decorated with evergreen boughs, symbols of life persisting through winter. There was feasting, gift-giving, and general merriment. The festival was wildly popular. Now here is where our story becomes complex. By the early 4th century, Christianity had grown from a persecuted minority into a significant force within the empire. When Emperor Constantine converted to Christianity in 312 AD and later made it the state religion, church leaders faced a delicate problem. Millions of Roman citizens had celebrated Sol Invictus for generations. It was woven into the fabric of their winter customs, their family traditions, their very understanding of the season. The church had 2 options: condemn these celebrations as pagan and risk alienating much of the population, or adapt them, transform them, give them new Christian meaning. According to historical records, and this is documented in the writings of several church fathers, they chose the latter. By the late 4th century, December 25th had been officially adopted as the celebration of Christ's birth. The reasoning was theological. Jesus was the true light of the world, replacing the false worship of the sun god. But the customs, many of those remained remarkably unchanged. Chapter 2: The Festival That Wouldn't Die. To fully grasp what happened, we need to understand another celebration, one even older, and if we're being honest, considerably wilder: Saturnalia. This was Rome's most beloved winter festival, honoring Saturn, the god of agriculture and time. It typically ran from December 17th to December 23rd, though sometimes longer. The historical accounts of Saturnalia are quite remarkable. The Roman poet and philosopher Seneca, writing in the 1st century AD, described Saturnalia as a time when the whole mob has let itself go in pleasures. The historian Livy tells us that during these days, social norms were deliberately inverted. Masters served meals to their slaves. Gambling, normally illegal, was permitted in the streets. People wore colorful, casual clothes instead of the formal toga. Gift-giving was central to Saturnalia. Small terracotta figurines, called sigillarias, were exchanged, along with candles, symbolizing the return of light. Most fascinating, perhaps, was the custom of selecting a lord of misrule, a temporary king of the festivities, who could command others to do absurd things, all in good fun. This tradition of topsy-turvy authority, of temporary freedom from social strictures, resonated deeply with the Roman people. The Senate tried, on multiple occasions, to shorten Saturnalia or contain its excesses. They failed every time. It was simply too popular, too essential to Roman identity. When Christianity became the dominant religion, Saturnalia presented the same challenge as Sol Invictus. You cannot simply erase a beloved tradition, not without tremendous resistance. So once again, the Church adapted. The gift-giving continued, but it was reframed as honoring the Magi, bringing gifts to the Christ child. The feasting remained, but it became a celebration of Christ's generosity. The evergreen decorations, originally honoring Saturn and symbolizing agricultural renewal, were reinterpreted as representing eternal life through Christ. Even the Lord of Misrule persisted well into the Middle Ages, though the Church attempted to give it Christian context through the Feast of Fools and the boy-bishop ceremonies. This process, scholars call it inculturation, was not unique to Christmas. Throughout history, when one culture or religion supplants another, practices often blend rather than disappear entirely. But this raises a question worth considering. At what point does adaptation become something else entirely? When does the original meaning become so diluted that what remains is essentially a new creation altogether? It's worth pausing here, because what we're describing is not a conspiracy or a deception. It is simply the way cultures evolve, through contact, through pragmatism, through the very human desire to keep what feels comfortable and familiar. The early church leaders were not trying to deceive anyone. They were trying to build a faith that could speak to people where they already were, using symbols and celebrations those people already understood. Whether you find this approach wise or troubling, well, that depends on your perspective. I'd be interested to know how you interpret this. Feel free to share your thoughts below. Chapter 3: The Geographic Shift. Our story now moves north, beyond the Roman Empire, into the forests of Germania and Scandinavia, where winter was longer, darker, and infinitely more threatening. The Germanic and Norse peoples had their own winter celebrations, and these were considerably more primal than anything Rome had practiced. Yule, the midwinter festival, was observed around the winter solstice. This was a time of genuine danger. Food stores might not last through winter. The sun seemed to be dying, retreating further each day. Survival was uncertain. In this context, Yule was part celebration, part propitiation of the gods, part sympathetic magic, aimed at bringing back the sun and ensuring survival. According to the Norse sagas and the later writings of Christian missionaries, Yule involved animal sacrifice, horses, cattle, sometimes boars, with their blood sprinkled on altars and the walls of buildings. This was not cruelty for its own sake, it was considered essential. The gods needed to be fed, honored, convinced to allow spring to return. The Yule log, a massive piece of wood that would burn throughout the celebration, was believed to hold protective power. Its ashes were kept and scattered in fields to ensure fertility. And then there was the wild hunt. The wild hunt is one of the most persistent and unsettling myths of Northern Europe. During the darkest nights of winter, it was believed that Odin, the All-Father, god of wisdom and death, led a spectral procession across the sky. This hunting party consisted of the dead, of spirits, of supernatural beings mounted on ghostly horses. To witness the wild hunt was considered extremely dangerous. At best, you might be struck with terror. At worst, you might be swept up into the procession yourself, never to return. People left offerings, bread, ale, on their doorsteps, hoping to appease the hunt and ensure it passed by without incident. When Christian missionaries arrived in these northern lands, beginning in the 8th and 9th centuries, they encountered traditions that were far more difficult to Christianize than Roman festivals. These were not sophisticated urban celebrations that could be easily reinterpreted. These were deeply rooted in survival, in genuine fear of the darkness and cold. Yet even here, adaptation occurred. The Christmas tree, which most of us now consider the centerpiece of the holiday, has its origins in these Northern European traditions, specifically the Germanic custom of decorating evergreen trees during winter festivals. The first documented Christmas tree appears in Germany in the 16th century, though the practice likely predates this. The symbolism was similar to Roman evergreens, life persisting through winter's death. But there may also be echoes of ancient tree worship, of beliefs that spirits resided in certain sacred groves. Odin himself underwent a curious transformation. Over centuries, his imagery, the long beard, the ability to travel vast distances in a single night, the association with winter, merged with the figure of Saint Nicholas, a 4th-century Christian bishop from what is now Turkey. Saint Nicholas was known for his generosity to the poor, for secretly providing dowries for young women, for protecting children. But the modern image of Santa Claus, riding through the winter sky, delivering gifts in a single night, carries unmistakable echoes of Odin's wild hunt. I find this fascinating, how a god associated with death and the hunt could, over many centuries, evolve into a jolly gift giver. It suggests something about humanity's need for transformation, for finding light in darkness, for domesticating our fears. Let us pause for a moment and consider where we are in this exploration. We've seen how December 25th was chosen not from biblical evidence, but from Roman solar worship. We've examined how Saturnalia's customs were absorbed into early Christmas celebrations. We've traveled north to witness the darker, more primal roots of Yule, and how even these were gradually Christianized. What emerges is not a simple story of a holiday's origins, but rather a complex tapestry, threads of many colors, many cultures, many beliefs, woven together over 2,000 years. Next, we need to address a question that may have occurred to you. If Christmas absorbed so many non-Christian elements, how did Christians themselves view this? Was everyone comfortable with this blending? Or were there objections, resistance, even outright bans? Chapter 4. The Puritans' War on Christmas. Here is something that might surprise you. Christmas, as we know it, was once illegal in parts of England and America. In the 17th century, Puritan reformers, both in England under Oliver Cromwell and in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, actually banned the celebration of Christmas. Their reasoning was thoroughly documented in sermons and legal proclamations of the time. The Puritan argument. The Puritans were biblical literalists who believed in returning to the pure, uncorrupted practices of early Christianity. When they examined Christmas, they saw several problems. First, as we've discussed, December 25th appears nowhere in the Bible. Therefore, celebrating it was, in their view, adding to Scripture, something explicitly forbidden. Second, they recognized, quite accurately, that Christmas customs derived largely from pagan celebrations. The feasting, the decorating, the general merriment, these bore no resemblance to anything in the Gospels. Third, and perhaps most importantly, they observed that Christmas had become an excuse for drunkenness, gambling, and sexual license, particularly in the tradition of misrule that had survived from Saturnalia and medieval times. In 1644, the English Parliament passed a law requiring that December 25th be treated as a normal working day. Christmas celebrations were banned. Soldiers were sent to enforce this, confiscating festive food and breaking up gatherings. In Boston, in 1659, the General Court decreed that anyone found celebrating Christmas would be fined 5 shillings, a substantial sum at the time. This was not peripheral opposition. These were the governing authorities, backed by widely held religious convictions, declaring that Christmas was not merely optional, but actively wrong, and yet, people celebrated anyway. The historical records show repeated instances of defiance. In England there were Christmas riots in several cities. In Canterbury, in 1647, protesters decorated doorways with holly, despite the ban. When soldiers tried to stop them, crowds gathered, and violence erupted. Why such fierce resistance? Perhaps because by this point, Christmas had become more than a religious observance. It had become a cultural touchstone, a moment of joy and connection in otherwise difficult lives. The Puritan bans were ultimately unsustainable. In England, Christmas was restored after the monarchy returned in 1660. In America, the bans gradually eroded, though Christmas wasn't declared a federal holiday until 1870, remarkably recent in historical terms. But this episode reveals something important. The tension between Christmas as a sacred religious commemoration and Christmas as a secular cultural celebration is not new. It has existed in various forms for centuries. Chapter 5. The Victorian Invention. The Christmas we recognize today, with its emphasis on children, gift-giving, family gatherings, Christmas trees, and sentimental warmth, is largely a Victorian creation, particularly from the 1840s onward. This is worth emphasizing because many people assume our Christmas traditions are ancient, unchanged across generations. In fact, most are less than 200 years old. Several factors converge to create modern Christmas. First, Charles Dickens published A Christmas Carol in 1843. This novella, which has sold continuously ever since, reshaped how English-speaking people understood Christmas. Dickens emphasized generosity, redemption, family, and the plight of the poor. His Christmas was domestic, sentimental, and socially conscious. The book was enormously influential. Within a few years, English newspapers were commenting that Dickens had done more to revive Christmas than any man alive. Second, Prince Albert, Queen Victoria's German husband, popularized the Christmas tree in England. When an illustration of the royal family gathered around a decorated tree was published in 1848. It sparked a trend that spread rapidly through all social classes. Third, the Industrial Revolution made Christmas gifts affordable and accessible. Mass production meant that items previously handmade and expensive, toys, decorations, printed cards, could now be purchased by middle-class families. The first commercial Christmas card was produced in London in 1843, the same year as A Christmas Carol. By the 1860s, millions were being sent annually. Fourth, department stores recognized Christmas as a commercial opportunity. They created elaborate window displays, hired men to dress as Santa Claus, and encouraged the association between Christmas and shopping. In America, Thomas Nast's illustrations in Harper's Weekly, from the 1860s onward, established the modern image of Santa Claus, rotund, jolly, dressed in red, living at the North Pole with a workshop of elves. By the late 19th century, Christmas had been thoroughly reimagined, less religious, more commercial, more centered on children and domestic happiness. What's remarkable is that this transformation followed the same pattern we've seen throughout Christmas's history: adaptation, absorption, reinvention. The Victorians took elements from many sources: German trees, Dutch Sinterklaas traditions, English Christmas dinner customs, American commercial innovation, and wove them into something that felt both traditional and new. Just as the early church had adapted Roman festivals, the Victorians adapted what they found useful and discarded what didn't serve their vision of Christmas as the ultimate family celebration. And here we must ask, is the modern secularized Christmas that emerged from the Victorian era a fulfillment of Christmas's long evolution, or a final departure from its religious roots? That question, I suspect, will mean different things to different people. Chapter 6. What remains? So we arrive at last at our present day. Christmas is now celebrated in virtually every corner of the world by billions of people, many of whom are not Christian. It has become, in many contexts, a cultural holiday rather than exclusively a religious one. The traditions we practice, decorating trees, exchanging gifts, gathering for meals, singing carols, carry within them echoes of Roman solar festivals, Germanic winter celebrations, medieval Christian adaptations, Puritan resistance, and Victorian sentimentality. For some, this history diminishes Christmas, suggests it is derivative, artificial, even pagan at its core. For others, it enriches Christmas, demonstrates the profound human need for light in darkness, for celebration in difficult seasons, for rituals that bind communities together. I would suggest that what this history really reveals is something about humanity itself. We are meaning makers. We take what we inherit, symbols, stories, customs, and we transform them, generation after generation, always adapting them to serve our deepest needs, for connection, for hope, for beauty, for transcendence. Christmas is not one thing. It is many things, layered across time. It is solar worship and virgin birth. It is drunken revelry and silent prayer. It is ancient fear of winter's darkness and modern commercial excess. It is all of these simultaneously. Perhaps the lesson here is not that Christmas has a true origin that we've lost or corrupted. Perhaps the lesson is that Christmas, like all profound human traditions, is less a fixed thing than an ongoing conversation across centuries. What each generation chooses to emphasize, what it chooses to discard, what new elements it adds, these choices reveal what we value, what we long for, what we need winter to mean. I don't pretend to have definitive answers about what Christmas should be. That's a question each person must answer for themselves, informed by their own faith, values, and experiences. But I do think understanding the history, the full, complex, sometimes uncomfortable history, allows us to celebrate more consciously, more thoughtfully. We can appreciate the layered richness of our traditions. We can recognize that our ancestors, facing different challenges and holding different beliefs, nevertheless felt the same winter darkness we feel, the same need for light and warmth and connection. And perhaps that continuity, that long human chain stretching back through centuries, is itself something worth honoring. So there it is, the hidden history of Christmas, not so much dark as complex, not so much secret as simply forgotten by most of us in the busyness of modern life. The scholars and historians have always known these things. The evidence exists in ancient texts, archaeological findings, church records, folk traditions preserved across generations. But it's not typically what we discuss over Christmas dinner, and perhaps that's understandable. Sometimes we need our traditions to be simple, uncomplicated, warm. Still, for those willing to look deeper, there is richness here. History that doesn't diminish our celebrations, but rather adds dimension to them. I want to thank you for staying with me through this exploration. This style of documentary, patient, detailed, willing to sit with complexity, requires a particular kind of viewer. You've demonstrated that patience, and I'm grateful. If you found this worthwhile, I'd be honored if you'd consider subscribing to this channel. I create documentaries like this regularly, unhurried explorations of history, culture, and the human story, topics that reward thinking, rather than just watching. I also maintain an active community tab where I share additional research, primary sources, and thoughtful questions for those who wish to explore further. Many subscribers tell me they enjoy continuing these conversations there. And if you know someone, a friend, a family member who appreciates this kind of thoughtful documentary, please consider sharing this with them. Word of mouth from viewers like you is how this work finds the people it's meant for. Until next time, I wish you well. May your winter, however you choose to mark it, be filled with warmth, with light, and with meaningful connection.